It is now in order to consider amendment number 15, printed in House Report 111-182. For what purpose, gentleman from Missouri, rise?
I ask for the adoption of the amendment.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 15, printed in House Report number 111-182, offered by Mr. Akin of Missouri.
Pursuant to House Resolution 572, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Akin, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment that we're bringing to the floor here is dealing with a situation that has become increasingly difficult between the legislative branch and the executive branch, or specifically the Pentagon. That is that the leadership of the Pentagon is requiring generals or admirals to sign non-disclosure agreements. That is, they're not allowed to share their opinions with members of Congress. In the past, our relationship with the Pentagon has been one of openness and trying to work together as a team. The Armed Services Committee has always been a very bipartisan committee who worked well together, and we've always tried to have it a win-win kind of situation, both between the parties but also between the legislative branch and the Pentagon. Unfortunately, these non-disclosure statements have a tendency, we're concerned, with muzzling our admirals and generals and from preventing them from giving us data that we need to be able to do our job. This amendment is being brought on from Virginia, Ms. Forbes, and I would yield to 2 minutes.
Virginia's for 2 minutes.
If we don't listen to this debate, we need to pause just a moment and listen to what's happening right now. Just a couple of moments ago on missile defense, we heard over there, quote, unless you have oversight, you should not spend money on missile defense or other platforms. And yet, the majority in this administration fights us every juncture to deny the transparency we need for that very oversight. This administration came in, the first executive order that they had said that a democracy requires accountability and accountability requires transparency. And the first things they do when it comes to national defense, they issued gag orders to hundreds of people in the Pentagon so that they could not talk about the severity of some of these changes and some of the cuts taking place. They classified the inspections on our vessels so we can't know the difficulty we have with maintenance requirements. They refused to certify that the budget would meet our shipbuilding plan as required by law. They refused to even send over a shipbuilding plan. They refused to certify an aviation plan that the budget would meet that as required by law. They refused to even send over an aviation plan, and they refused to give us the out-year projections on what the budget dollars would actually be. And Mr. Speaker, we have a simple amendment that would try to rein in some of these gag orders, and the majority's already sent out a letter saying it's just too hard, it's going to impact all of these other programs, when they could have exempted every single one of those programs if they wanted to. They just refused to do it. And the bottom line is, Mr. Chairman, when it comes down to transparency with this administration, here's what it means. We're going to be transparent for our enemies. We're going to tell them what questions we can ask them, what we can try to gather information from them when they're about to attack our nation or innocent civilians. But when it comes to transparency to the American people and what's going in the budget, we're not going to do that. And so, Mr. Speaker, I hope it'll be the pleasure of this House to adopt this amendment and put some transparency back in this process. Now I yield back.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Missouri reserves the balance of his time.
Mr. Speaker, I would yield 1 minute to the distinguished ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, Mr. McKeon.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the gentleman for yielding. This amendment would require the Secretary of Defense to report to the Congress on the use of non-disclosure agreements within the DoD. The use of non-disclosure agreements is a new and troubling way of gagging our military and DoD civilians. Congress should be aware of any effort by the Department to restrict information. This amendment is about transparency. Congress cannot sit back and let the Department of Defense stiff-arm us. Congress has a constitutional duty to raise and support armies, provide and maintain a Navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. We can't allow the Department of Defense to prevent us from exercising our constitutional duty. I understand the chairman has concerns about the language, but I would urge him to support the amendment and work with us in conference. We have lots of time left to work on this, and I think together we can strengthen this. I think we're in agreement on concept. We need to know what we need to know to do our duty. With that, I ask support of the amendment, and I yield back the
Gentleman
balance of
yields
my
back the
time.
balance of his time.
May I ask the chair how much time is
Gentleman from
remaining?
Missouri has 1 minute remaining, and the other gentleman from Missouri has 1.5 minutes remaining and the right to close.
He has the right to close?
Yes.
Well, I'll go ahead and close then. I very much appreciate the tremendous cooperation that's existed on the Armed Services Committee. I'm sensitive to your concerns about this being overly broad in its drafting. I hate red tape and paperwork, and am very open-minded to work along these lines. I think our concerns are very much the same on this issue, and I look forward to working with you. Unfortunately, in trying to get the thing drafted the way we wanted, we ran out of time today, so we're just going ahead offering the amendment, but I look forward to working as we have time in the weeks ahead. I yield back.
Gentleman from Missouri yields back the balance of time.